Yesterday, Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago announced that the interest rate remains unchanged at 6.5%. Furthermore, SARB forecasts that the economy should grow by 0.7% this year, 1.9% next year, and 2% in 2020. Also, today, this morning actually, President Ramaphosa is expected to present his strategic growth plan. Let's unpack all of this with my guest, Ian Scott, Head of Fixed Income at Momentum Investments. Ian, good to see you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
So, no big surprises that the interest rates were left unchanged yesterday, even though some were predicting that it might go higher. What were you expecting?
Here at Momentum Investments, we weren't expecting any interest rate hikes. We're also not expecting any interest rate hikes for the rest of 2018. We think the economy is probably too weak at this point in time. We are in a recession, technical or not, a recession is a recession. So we know that the consumer is really under fire. There's not a lot of disposable income out there in the market at the moment. So I think the task for the SARB is quite hard. There's no easy decisions to make around interest rates at this point in time. But what's probably better is that interest rates stay where they are for the moment, and the SARB probably deflect some of the emerging market tensions that we're seeing in the world at the moment. So, yes, if rates probably would go up at some point in 2019, because you probably expect that inflation would go out a little bit higher, but not probably breach the target range. But the SARB probably also wants to say, well, they want to stick to their inflation target and credibility. So at some or other point, we think they probably would have to hike rates, but it might be a much shallower cycle. So what we mean is interest rates will probably not go up as much as people would expect at this point in time.
So we kind of saying in our news that we expect, well, some economists are expecting that it may increase before the end of this year. You guys, you don't have the same view.
We think the SARB will hold the pressure a little bit. We'll see what happens to the rand and oil prices. I think we have a little bit of calm in oil prices and emerging markets. The SARB can probably hold all for this year. That's our view at the moment, but things can change.
Well, I mean, we saw the governor also talking and making mention of demand pressures. You know, I can gather what he was meaning, but I suppose maybe let's get a view from the expert. What is he referring to?
Well, demand pressures basically is if there's a lot of disposable income in the consumer pocket and they can really go out and spend and buy and swipe the credit cards. There's not a lot of that at the moment. We know that credit creation, what we call PSCE, is very low at the moment. So the consumer is really under fire. We think that what's happening with petrol prices, taking a lot of disposable income out of the consumer pocket. We've seen the hike in VAT rates. We've seen administered prices go up. So the consumer doesn't have a lot of disposable income, let's say income after all his expenses, to go out and spend. So there's no demand. So demand pressure is basically the consumer spending. There's no demand pressure for the consumer to spend money so that retailers can raise prices. If we talk to food retailers and you talk to the ShopRite, they'll say to you, but 13,000 of their products are actually in deflation. Prices are going down. So there's no demand pressure from the consumer side that warrants high inflation. The inflation that we're seeing comes from what you call the supply side, from the rand selling off, oil prices being at 79. That's where inflation comes from. So interest rates has got very little control over the international oil price or the rand.
It is tough times for South Africa, and I mean there is very little spare cash around that one can go and spend frivolously when we're looking at, again, we're on the brink of another petrol price increase, and I think a very steep petrol price increase coming in October. We are seeing, threats of electricity price increases. There was the VAT increase at the beginning of this year. Our currency is not doing well at all. In fact, we're sitting and saying that it depreciated by about 7.3% against the dollar since July. And Kganyago also referring to this, saying that the rand is undervalued. What are your expectations for the currency going forward?
The rand is undervalued because, unfortunately, the issue that we have at the moment is that international investors see emerging markets, which we are part of, as a group. And when they sell off emerging markets, they sell them off as a group. And unfortunately for us, the rand is one of the most liquid currencies in the world at the moment. So it's always not that easy to trade out of, let's say, Turkish lira or Argentinian pesos, but it's much easier to trade out of rand. So when investors sit in New York or London or wherever in the world, and they say, well, just get me out of emerging markets, it's very easy to sell the rand. So we think the rand has been a victim of very negative perceptions towards emerging markets. And we think over the next year, there could be the possibility that rand strengthens a little bit if we get a bit of calm around emerging markets. But yes, we feel that the rand is probably undervalued at this point in time. How far can it go back? Well, that is probably anybody's guess. But if we look at all the metrics at what we call real effective exchange rates and PPPs and all these terminology that economists use, the rand is undervalued, and we would probably suspect that the rand, what we call, return to a fair value from this, what we call a fairly undervalued position at this point in time. Now that would help inflation a lot.
Yeah.
That would take the pressure off the SARB to suddenly hike rates. So you can clearly see that if the rand just comes back to where we believe a more fair value is.
Which is at about?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, everybody tries to forecast the rand. It's the hardest thing in South Africa, but we think over the next year, if you can get back to a 1365, I know it sounds ridiculous at this point in time, but the rand is really undervalued.
Yeah.
Well, you can just imagine, we go from 1440 to 1365. I mean, that takes the inflation pressure away for the SARB to hike.
Yeah.
We don't know, will it happen? I mean, how many other things have to move to get there? So maybe we just need a little bit of calm from, the whole tariff debate between China and Mr. Trump. I mean, that needs to calm a little bit. If it continues, the rand will not strengthen, because that is just the way of the world at this point in time, because there's fear.
And we just get hammered from every angle. There's no getting away from it. Also growth. And I want to spend a bit of time talking about growth, because at the end of the day, this is where we're failing, and we're failing drastically on this. And where we talk growth, we talk job creation, we talk, and that's what we are hoping to hear a little bit more this morning from our President, Cyril Ramaphosa. But focusing on yesterday, the growth forecast has been brought down to 0.7%, and this is from 1.2% was the expectation in July. Again, looking forward, 1.9% next year, 2% in 2020. I mean, are these growth forecasts realistic? But when I say realistic, are they good enough for this environment we find ourselves in?
Well, the problem is probably for the last 10 years, every time we start the year, we say, well, we're going to grow at 2%. And then we get to the middle of the year, we take it down to less than 1%, and that's been over the last 10 years. It's not been a 1 or 2 year phenomenon, and unfortunately we're in that cycle again. I think the issue at the moment is the word called certainty. If we really, because it's about job creation. So how do you get job creation? Is you need mines, businesses to invest. How do they invest? They can only invest when they have certainty. How do we have certainty? Well, we know what government's going to do. We know what the mining charter is going to do. What does industrial policy look like? Do we have certainty around labor policy? Do we have certainty? We've got a lot of certainty around, how does the interest rate profile look like? What is the SARB going to do? We actually have a lot of credibility when it comes to inflation targeting. We've got a lot of credibility when it comes to national treasury and the budgeting process. But we need to get rid of a lot of the uncertainties around mining charters and around all the politics at the moment. We need a bit of calm, because let's be fair, businesses won't invest, they won't create jobs if there's not certainty. So hopefully the one expectation that I have for today is that the President creates a little bit of certainty, because more uncertainty will just probably make it worse. You can't grow with uncertainty.
And that's the reality. When you talk certainty, what do we need from him? What do we need for him to come out and say? Because at this point in time, we have to create confidence in the South African economy, because there's also a lack of investment into the economy, and we hear that from everybody. I mean, I had two people talking to us yesterday from Labour, from Business Unity South Africa, also saying the same thing, is that the uncertainty is causing investors not to put their money into South Africa and rather find it elsewhere, including businesses in South Africa who do not want to invest in South Africa. What do we need to hear from the President when you talk certainty?
Well, you talk certainty, we want to know what industrial policy is going to look like. I think, if you talk to businesses, a weak rand policy is not an industrial policy. You've got to come out and say, well, this is what it means for businesses. We need to have certainty around property rights. We have to have buy-in from business, labour and government that this is going to be the plan. We've been making plans for 20 years and we've not been following through with it. I think it's quite important that whatever the President announces, that there's buy-in from all three groups. And if all three groups say, let's not do 20 things, let's do 5 things, but let's try and do it well and make it work. I think that creates certainty. Business wants to know, what environment are we going to operate in the next 5 or 10 years? Now, that's very hard to say, but at least if you don't have this political uncertainty around it, business will feel more comfortable building that factory, creating jobs. But while there's all this political noise around, why would you invest capital? Because I think the issue that you have is that capital is a lot more volatile, or it can go a lot more places than it was 20 or 30 years ago. If it's not happy about South Africa, there's many other places to invest.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 or 30 years ago, there wasn't a lot of places to invest because the way South Africa was structured, capital was trapped in South Africa. Capital is not trapped in South Africa anymore. If it finds better opportunities elsewhere in the world, it will go there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a little bit about some of the expectations for this afternoon, for this morning's announcement, I should say, which is possibly a new mining charter. You alluded to this as well. I want to talk more about that. Far-reaching changes to tourist regulations, and that's something that's been a bit of a nail in our side because of those very strict tourist regulations which have chased some of the tourists away, which is a great sector that we need to grow in our economy, and also infrastructure investment plan and the development of industrial parks and township businesses, among other things. Those are some of the expectations. But the mining, the mining charter for a second, what do you want to see change there? What's the big thing we need to get over?
Well, I think it's certainty around mining rights.
Yeah.
And what will be the cost? And we know it's always a give and a take. What will be the actual cost that mines have to give up? And let's be fair that we know that mining is a very long-term project. It's very capital intensive, but you cannot invest that capital if you're not certain what the framework or the legislation will be in the next 5 or 10 years. How can you sink a shaft, do everything that needs in mining if you don't know what will change in the next 3 or 5 years and what that cost will be? If business can work out what that cost will be, whatever they've agreed with labor and with communities, and they can work it out, and there's certainty around it, and it's amicable and it's fair, I think then you can have mining invest again.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pent-up demand to invest in mining, but nobody will invest until we have more certainty. Once again, bring that certainty to the table, and I think investment will come.
Well, that's what we're hoping for. Now, just if we can, I'm throwing you into the tourism sector. I'm not sure if that's your strong point, but this is a major sector that can grow. I mean, we're talking an employer of 1.6 million people. There is space for job creation there. There is space for growth. We need changes there when it comes to making it easier for people to come into South Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, in the rest of the world, I mean, tourism is a big thing. It's a big job creator. It's an easy win. What we really call it. It is an easy
win, and especially with a currency like this. They're getting a steal when they come to South Africa, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And it's a really easy win, and it really is a job creator. So why do you make it hard for tourists to come into your country? If you look at what's happening in the East, remember the old Asian crisis, what did the East Asian countries do in the late 90s to early 2000s to get their current accounts going again? They said, well, come to our countries, come and spend money. It creates jobs. It helps with a current account. Absolutely. Tourism is an easy winner. It's not capital intensive, and you create a lot of jobs. South Africa is a beautiful country. It's got so many potential.
Yeah, we need to tap more into it.
Why do you just throttle it? There's no point.
There's no point. And then finally, I think the very big talking point here is something quite interesting, and I think we'll get more details out of this, is the large government infrastructure fund, which is hoping to leverage the private sector resources and expertise in implementing infrastructure projects. And this, I think, people are really, really hoping for when it comes to including economic reforms in the telecommunications and transport sectors. So these are big sectors, and infrastructure a big talking point here. Again, any views on that?
Yeah, so we'd like to get more involved with it. I'm very passionate about it, what we call real assets. I think a big issue at the moment is water. I think we should build dams. We've seen what the issues were over the last 3 years in Cape Town. So infrastructure is a major thing. I think there's money in the pension fund industry that will partner government saying, let's go and build the dams, let's go and build the railways, let's go and build what we need to do to build infrastructure. I mean, that could be massive job creation, good opportunity. We need infrastructure in this country. We need to fix the roads. We need to fix the water reticulation systems, whatever we need to do. I think there's great opportunity, but once again, we need certainty. How are we going to do it? How are we going to finance it? And how are we going to do it, what they call PPPs, the partnerships, that type of thing. But I think there's great opportunity.
Yeah, we talk partnerships, but partnerships with, we also are saying the Japanese investments, and that could be incorporated into all of this because there's interest from Japan to invest in South Africa, not to mention the massive amount of investment from China into South Africa, which is a lot of people saying a double-edged sword. So I don't know what your views are on that.
I take it with a pinch of salt. I would. So I'd be wary of what the Chinese do, because we'd like to see what they do. I don't mind the Japanese because I think they've got a different culture, but yes, I think partnership, it makes sense. We can partner government in doing these projects, but we've got to do it on an above board level.
Indeed, and that's, I think, the key. We need to see the terms and conditions. Ian Scott, thanks very much for talking to us. Head of Fixed Income at Momentum Investments, talking to us about the economy, the repo rate remaining unchanged for now at 6.5%. Also growth forecast for the rest of the year, and most importantly, that big stimulus package that we expect our president to announce this morning at 10 o'clock. A little bit of a preview of that. Let us take a break. We'll see you after this with the news at 7.